Kirk, thank you so much for being here. I've really enjoyed reading your book, The Happiness Factor. But, I thought it was interesting because you devoted one whole segment, chapter, outline in there, I can't remember, to the topic of forgiveness. Why did you feel that that was so vital?
Well, as I've started this whole process and dedicating my life to helping people be happier, I have learned that there are so many people that are holding grudges, wanting revenge, and hoping that people get what they deserve, that it really is a barrier or an obstacle to being happy. And yeah, I dedicated one whole chapter to it. It probably could be a whole book. It is that important that once we learn to forgive, we really open ourselves up to be truly and completely happy.
And you call it emotional baggage, and I hadn't thought about that, but it is. We're carrying it around. It's a heavy burden. But it's hard for us. We say that we may forgive, but we don't forget, really. And is it a learned process that we have to go through?
I believe that you can learn to forgive. But what's happened most often is that people know that they need to forgive, and yet we don't practice it enough that we become very rusty at it. Or we become prideful and say, well, I'm going to wait for the other person to say they're sorry before I forgive. But what's happening is that we are holding that anger. We're holding the emotion inside of us, and it's hurting us much more than it's hurting the other person. So if you can prioritize being happy over getting revenge or holding a grudge, you're actually one step closer to what I call core happiness. And that is happiness that happens from the inside out.
But do you find, and you talk to people in groups of people, companies all over the world, do you find that many of us just don't recognize that we're doing that? We may realize that we don't like someone quite as much as someone else, but that we don't even acknowledge to ourselves that we're really holding a grudge?
Absolutely. In fact, it's not until sometimes in my seminars and my workshops that I start to bring this up that people have kind of a light bulb go off and say, oh, forgiving can be a skill. I can actually learn to forgive as part of the skills to learn how to be happy. Because we become so accustomed to, for me, it was like I was collecting ammunition. Why I shouldn't like someone or why I didn't need to like them. So everything they did wrong, everything that I saw them do, I was holding it and saying, oh, that's why I don't like them. And we get so used to it that that just becomes the way that we operate and how we interact with people. But if we can forgive, all of that goes away and we can truly be at peace.
And another benefit of forgiveness is for our own physical health. And you went through some very serious treatments with cancer. Was this an awakening for you in terms of forgiving, living each day, for instance, as though it were the last, appreciating people and gratitude?
Absolutely. All of those things that happen in our lives, in my life, being a 2-time cancer survivor, my mother abandoned me when I was 8 years old, and I've only seen her 6 times in the past 44 years and thought that I had handled it pretty well. I could have blamed every problem I had on her leaving me. And it wasn't until about 6 years ago I realized, I really have not forgiven her. And once I did, it was like this huge burden was lifted off my shoulder. I felt that I was an inch taller. I felt that I looked younger. It makes a significant difference. Studies have shown that people that forgive are healthier because their immune system is stronger, they have less depression, and they live longer. So just for those reasons alone,
why wouldn't we want to forgive?
We should forgive.
And you said if we can learn to forgive a person in one situation, it helps in other relationships that we have.
Absolutely. I think that it's very difficult to give away what you don't have. And if you're holding a grudge for someone, that means you don't love them. And it's hard to give that away. If you can't forgive yourself, it's very difficult to forgive others. But when you do, you're able to love more deeply, your relationships are more intense, and you're able to give people the benefit of the doubt more often because you see them in their innocence instead of their guilt.
What about, though, the times that, and we probably have all said this, time heals all wounds, I'll just go about my daily life, I'm not going to really forgive because time's going to take care of that.
Yeah, I hear that a lot. And time does lessen the intensity of an experience. But, you know, I recently talked to someone who said that about 8 years ago she had an argument with her best friend. And it wasn't that big of a deal, but for 8 years they have not talked. They have not spoken. They avoid each other at family gatherings. Time did not heal that wound. In fact, between now and when time would actually heal it, we're suffering. And I say, well, let's accelerate that time to now, get rid of those feelings, and be happy.
But there's a lot of emotion involved in forgiveness, and for some people, it's very hard to open up enough. I can see saying, well, I'm ready to forgive them if they'll just make the first gesture. Yeah. But it might be hard for us to make that first gesture. So how do you encourage people to be able to do that?
Well, I actually teach forgiveness in a 5-step process, and we don't have time to go through all 5 steps, but there's one thing I'd like to share that will make a significant difference, and that is that you need to retell the story about the experience so that you're no longer the victim.
Now, who are we telling it to?
Ourselves. We don't need to really tell it to the other person. In fact, I think that part of forgiveness starts inside before you even express forgiveness to another person. And you may not ever verbalize it to them, but you do the forgiving.
Your actions will be different.
Yes, you do the forgiveness internally. And here's how you retell the story. Let's say that you had something really exciting happen in your life, which I'm sure a lot of exciting things happen to you, and you want to tell your best friend. And you call her up and you say, oh, guess what just happened to me? And you tell her what happened, and she's not happy. In fact, she's intimidated. She's jealous, and she criticizes you. Well, great things always happen to you, and why don't great things happen to me? And I think that that's a pretty realistic scenario, and your feelings are hurt.
You wished you hadn't have even called. You're
right.
So mad.
So mad about it. And you could keep that grudge for a long time. So when you retell the story, you give her the benefit of the doubt, and you say, you know, she was probably having a really bad day. Something must have happened in her life or in that day to make her really react that way, because that's really not her. I know her better than that. See, the same facts, the same experience, but a different story. And it's a story where you're not the victim, but you're kind of like the hero in the story. And if you can learn to tell yourself a different story where you're no longer the victim, the pain goes away. The intensity of the experience goes away. And so you don't have that feeling of, I'm going to wait for them to say they're sorry, because they really don't need to say they're sorry.
And they maybe don't even know that they hurt your feelings.
Exactly. So retelling the story is a beautiful way to start the process of forgiving. And all I can say is that there's miracles that will happen in your life through forgiving.
Well, thank you so much for pointing this out to us, and for the book. It has lots of words of wisdom for all of us at all times in our life. Thank you for being with us today, Kirk.
Thank you.
Kirk, thank you so much for being here.